Classic Justin, not looking at any of the topics before the podcast.
I was born for this show. I don't need to look at the topics.
Oh, we are going to be talking about a little bit about the Fauci emails, a little bit about Biden's proposed budget, and El Salvador adopting Bitcoin as its national currency. We're going to talk about all of that on episode 298 of the In the Tank podcast. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendall. Joining me today, I have got Jim Lakely, VP of the Heartland Institute. How are you, good sir?
I'm doing just fine. I just want to let all the listeners and viewers of this podcast to know that any attacks on me is an attack against freedom and liberty. Any attacks on the Heartland Institute are attacks upon liberty itself. Yeah. And all of you haters of liberty out there, you must hate liberty if you do not love and share this show. That's the message of today.
Yeah, if you have anything bad to say about Jim, you're basically deriding the Constitution. So keep that in mind, folks. Also joining us, we got Justin Haskins, editorial director here at the Heartland Institute. How are you, good sir?
I'm doing great, Donald. I'm doing great. As you know, every time I come on the show, I have to have a sponsor. That's the only way I'll actually come on the show. So I want to read a brief message from today's sponsor.
Oh, God.
Has life got you down? Have you had one too many lonely nights lately? Is your body starting to decay into a ghostly, white, lifeless corpse like that of Joe Biden's? Well, then pack your bags, get your hair did, and take that magical vacation you've been waiting for to the wonderful nation of El Salvador.
Oh, yay!
Featuring white, sandy beaches, packs of wild street dogs, and all the pupusas you can eat. El Salvador offers destination vacations you'll never forget. El Salvador. Beautiful people, beautiful beaches, beautiful Bitcoin.
How many Bitcoins did you get for that?
I got many Bitcoins. They're giving them away on the street to El Salvador.
So you don't read up on any of the topics we're going to talk about, but you write out a fake commercial. That's the prep that you do for this podcast.
You know, it requires less work for me to write fake commercials, frankly.
Oh, see,
super.
That's the intangibles that you bring to the podcast. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Jim, I also kind of, cater to you with my topics of choice here. I really wanted to talk about the Biden budget thing. Justin, our very own Justin, wrote an article about that. El Salvador and Bitcoin. Justin and I are both, interested in the cryptocurrency market and everything like that. So he and I have been talking about this story. But I was like, we need to have some low-hanging fruit item for Jim to rant about. Right. So I'm like, you know what? In our opening chit-chat section, let's talk about the Fauci emails. So surely you have been interested in this topic. I have no doubt. You have taken multiple selfies with a cardboard cutout of Grand Admiral Fauci. Right. So I figured that's right up your alley. So I'll let you kind of start off this. What... Were you reading the FOIA released emails about Fauci like as soon as they dropped, or what?
I think he was printing them out, and he had like one of those boards on the wall with all those strings attached to it and big red circles over Fauci's face, and that's what I'm imagining.
Is that right?
No, that's not right. That's actually not what I did. I took all the emails, I printed them out and spread them out, and then like threw them up in the air like Scrooge McDuck, and just like, really enjoyed all those pieces of paper.
Vindicated, vindication.
That's right, vindicated. So yeah, of course, we've been paying attention to the Fauci emails, and it's it exposes that we've been gaslit. Is it gaslighted or gaslit, Justin? I think
it's made up, so you can do whatever you want.
All right, we'll call it gaslit. This whole time, Fauci has not been telling the truth. And maybe even worse than that is the fact that the media, I get emails from the Washington Post, basically just to keep me at full annoyance for most of the day. So when those things pop in, it keeps me nice and irritated. There was one of the lead stories in their email today was how, after dismissing after dismissing as a conspiracy theory the idea that COVID-19 came out of a lab, now serious journalists are taking a look and doing some serious journalism. And yeah, that kind of set me off. I mean, look, we all knew this. We talked about this on the podcast. literally a year ago, if you talked about what is in the Washington Post today, you would get banned from social media.
Right.
You would have your social media accounts just taken away, and you would be silenced. Facebook would shadow ban you or just take you out. There was what these emails show. And in fact, one of the emails is actually correspondence between Mark Zuckerberg, the czar of Facebook, and Anthony Fauci. And Zuckerberg says, "Hey, just let me know what I can do to help you out, man." And apparently, the answer to how can Facebook help out Commissar Fauci, or should we call him Grand Moff Fauci? I think we can do something Star Wars related. But it was basically, this is how you can help us out. You can destroy the reputation and silence everybody who opposes what I say at the moment. And what I'm saying at the moment back then was that there was no way that COVID-19 could have come to the world any other way except through bats. Any other way. And of course, the emails show that very early on, he was told by scientists, follow the science, everybody. Scientists were contacting Fauci and saying, look, I've seen some of the data here, and this has all the fingerprints of something that was artificially manipulated in a lab, and it looks like it probably accidentally got out. And to this day, there is not a single shred of evidence, not anything that says that COVID-19 came out from bats to pangolins to a wet market where people are eating bat soup to humans to spreading all over the world. And people who had operating brains and had done any reading at all about the Wuhan lab and other labs.
Bitcoin has won over some of
in the United States and other labs in China. It shows that they have a very poor record of security, that leaks have happened in the past. And it made logical sense to say, hey, it's certainly possible and probable even that the virus came out of a lab. But Fauci and our media and the deep state, frankly, here we go again with that, made it so that you couldn't even say those words anywhere in public without being attacked. And for now, the Washington Post to come out and say, golly, it seems like what was a conspiracy theory before now there's some real serious journalism around it because of this, what was it, like a 7,000 word Vanity Fair piece about this very thing, that people that listen to this podcast, people who consume conservative media, and people who have operating brains could have figured out and did figure out a year ago. And one of the people that figured it out, or at least guessed correctly, was Donald Trump. And the media's excuse now is because Donald Trump said it, we dismissed it. He's not credible. So as soon as he said it, we had to throw it out as a possibility. That is worse than journalistic malpractice. That is actively lying to the American people out of spite and to help Donald Trump get defeated in the election. Can you imagine the difference in the American people's perception of COVID-19 if the truth about its origins was revealed at the time that a lot of people suspected it was to be? And now we have Dr. Fauci going on television saying that as these emails are being exposed and people are seeing all of this stuff, that we've been gaslit by him and by the media and by the establishment this entire time, and our people are pointing it out, and he has the gall to go on, I think it was Meet the Press Daily on CNN, or maybe it was MSNBC, one of the channels that nobody watches, because everybody watches Fox News instead. Double the ratings of those two loser channels. He goes on. He has the balls to say any attack on me is an attack on science itself. Well, go to hell, Dr. Fauci. It is not an attack on science. It's an attack on you as a gaslighting liar for the last year. And you should. There's a reason I suppose that Amazon pulled your book and Barnes and Noble pulled the pre-orders of your book down. I hope you cashed that check already, because I think your reputation is garbage. I've always thought your reputation is garbage, and now the rest of the world is understanding it too.
Yeah, there you go, man. A classic Jim rant. I knew it was there. I was just serving up that nice, easy softball lob right down the center, and Jim, you knocked it out of the park. But so my just kind of anecdotal experience with this story, I think just kind of proves the power of the media, right? So we did that one poll that was just kind of showing like whatever media you consume, and it kind of affects your worldview. And some people answered one of those questions suggesting that they thought the media in general was conservative leaning, right? So me not diving deep into this topic, I saw that the Fauci email stuff was kind of trending and all of that. And I was just doing some very bare minimum, just look at it, right? So I went on Twitter, terrible idea. Went on Twitter, just went through the trending and see what people were saying about it. In my Google news feed that's curated by Google, I was just kind of reading some headlines, and they were really underselling the entire story. It was like, oh, it's just confirming that he said that people shouldn't wear masks in the past, and then, we should wear masks now. It's like, no big deal. We already knew all of this stuff, right? So I just kind of dismissed it and just went along my day, went along my week. And then when it was just decided that we were going to talk about this on the podcast, I started reading some more articles about it and seeing that it goes well beyond just him being mistaken in the past. And, all of the things that you were just covering, where he had some credible people coming up to him and saying, this doesn't look like a naturally occurring virus. There's a possibility here that it might have been leaked from a lab. And then, like Jim was saying, he went over on all the media that he can go on, talking about how this is conspiracy theorists and all of this. And there's a number of these things where it looks like he's not just being mistaken or just following whatever the science was dictating at that moment in time. He was actively misleading people. And it would be one thing if all of this was just kind of chalked up to, we were just better safe than sorry, better safe than sorry. But like all of these things have major consequences. They have major consequences for society and the economy. And, it's interesting to see like the truth coming out. We already seen like Rand Paul kind of take a celebratory lap on Twitter about it. But it's also a shame that even with all of the stuff that's now coming out, you could see it plain as day, black and white in these emails that were released. The media is still trying to paint this as like a nothing burger, which is Justin's favorite term. Justin, any input on this story?
The thing at this point in time, it's like, does anybody trust anything the federal government says? I mean, I don't believe anything they tell me anymore. And I don't mean to sound like a conspiracy theorist or anything like that. But I mean, when we look at what happened with COVID, okay, and you see all of the absurd policies and rules and recommendations and the flip-flopping and everything that happened throughout that whole process. I'm still trying to figure out why I can't eat in a restaurant with 6 people, but I can fly in a plane in a giant metal tube 20,000 feet above the earth with 200 people. I don't understand why those two things happened throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. Why was that? I mean, it just, none of this made sense. And the fact that we actually had people from China saying, you know what? We were developing this in a lab. and they just kind of all looked the other way and said, well, obviously that person must be crazy or lying or whatever. I mean, there is no bounds to the extent that the federal government will go to mislead people. There just isn't. And especially in a crisis. If it's a crisis, anything goes. And then they'll just later on, they'll just say, you know what? We misunderstood this, or it looks like we got it wrong, or, oh, and the email's leaked. Oh, yeah, well, I wasn't really sure. And then everyone just looks the other way anyway. What's the consequences? Is anything going to happen to Fauci? No. Nothing's going to happen to any of these people. And we've seen this over and over and over again. Did anything happen due to Benghazi and all the lying that happened and all the email? We found out that they knew a whole lot more than they were telling us, and they just lied about it. Yeah. Nothing happened from that. There's a whole bunch of things that are like this. So at this point in time, I'm just at the point, and I think a lot of people are here. It's like you really can't trust a lot of what the government tells you anymore. I wish you could, but you really can't. I mean, Russian collusion, the list goes on and on and on.
No, you're right. And I've had people in my immediate family that's just like, oh, man, this crazy thing happened. But is anything going to result of it? No. It's just a shame. Let's move on. But yeah, will anything happen to Fauci? No. When any political figure is justly criticized, the worst of them generally go on the defensive. And they claim themselves to be a victim. And Fauci is no better, which is perfectly illustrated in this video if we can play it.
As attacks on me, quite frankly, are attacks on science. Because all of the things that I have spoken about consistently from the very beginning have been fundamentally based on science. Sometimes those things were inconvenient truths for people, and there was pushback against me. So if you are trying to, get at me as a public health official and a scientist, you're really attacking not only Dr. Anthony Fauci, you're attacking science. And anybody that looks at what's going on clearly sees that. You have to be asleep not to see that. That is what's going on. Science and the truth are being attacked as attacks on me.
And surely that the reporter, I don't even know, host of the show that is interviewing him, surely he's not going to confront him on other things that he was not being led by science on, which is his flip-flopping on the whole mask thing, which he admitted was basically political theater. He's not going to get pressed on the fact that he moved the goalposts on herd immunity and that he only told public, quote, what they were ready to hear. So is that science? What is that? Maybe that's psychology. So maybe I'm not giving enough credit here. But no, of course not. He's going to get a complete pass by the media, and he's still going to go down in the history books as this brave science-first guy that led us through this, this absolutely terrible pandemic. And, right-wingers were trying to take him down while he was doing it. That's what the history books are going to show, and it's just a travesty.
The hell they will. I mean, I think there's enough people that are going to, know the truth about this. It's plain to see. First of all, when was the last time Dr. Anthony Fauci did any science at all? He's been a bureaucrat for most of the last 50 years of his life. Do you think he sees patients while he's behind a desk somewhere at the National Institutes of Health or wherever the hell he works in some alphabet soup bureaucracy somewhere? He is the highest paid federal employee we have in this country. Obviously that includes the president of the United States. He makes the most money of anybody. We pay him more than anybody else, taxpayer money. His entire life has been funded by you and me, taxpayers of the United States of America. And he has spent the last year lying to us about almost every important aspect of the COVID-19 pandemic. You mentioned Rand Paul. In the Senate hearing, he tried to make the point over and over again, hey, if people have already had COVID-19, they don't need to get the vaccine. This, by the way, is an experimental vaccine, because if they've already had it, they have the antibodies to fight off not just the version of COVID-19 that they got, but also it seems to be effective on all the variants that are coming out from around the world and eventually making their way to the United States. The study, you know what science is? Science is that. Science is proof that is the case, that people who have already had COVID-19 have no greater reoccurrence of getting of symptoms of the disease than people who have had the vaccine. But what does Anthony Fauci say? No, you must all get this vaccine. And Rand Paul says, no, science says I don't have to. And so that was another lie. Our entire country was locked down. Millions of people lost jobs. Hundreds of thousands of small businesses destroyed forever, the life's work of people, kids taken out of school, basically an entire year of their lives taken away, and to be made scared for an entire year of dying or killing their own grandparents, all because Anthony Fauci says X, and we all must do according to what he says. And almost everything he said about the virus was incorrect. Now, you can excuse some of it for being, this was a novel coronavirus. This was something that nobody had ever seen. And I believe it was being experimented on in a lab in Wuhan so that we could learn more about, viruses like these to learn how to fight them. And it got out. And that's another aspect of this. And this is why Anthony Fauci is such a scoundrel. He is so defensive that any attacks on him, frankly, any questions to him are an attack on science itself. It is because it is becoming known that the National Institutes of Health funneled money to that very Wuhan lab to carry out this very dangerous type of experimentation. And he denies it, but there is a paper trail showing that this to be the case. And so he's trying to deflect and distract people. He is gaslighting us that any attack, that everything he said was fine and in good faith. It was not in good faith. It was to keep the country locked down. It was to defeat President Donald Trump. Ultimately, I believe that was what this was all about. And there was not a price too high to pay, price that we had to pay to carry out that agenda. And so to hell with that. The history books may say that, but I will never believe it. And I think at least half this country will never believe it because they're going to find out and know the truth about Dr. Anthony Fauci. And it is a disgrace. The man should be fired today.
Yeah.
Well, he won't be fired, and I think that he's a disgrace. But I don't think it had anything to do with Trump. I think he hated Trump, and I think that was obvious. And I don't think he could hide it. His disdain for him, just in every public event imaginable. But I think that the greater motivating factor behind many of the things that he did, and many of the things that other people did in government during that time, was just they're trying to cover their own butts. And they're trying to, do whatever they can to try to, not be put in a position where they're going to be blamed for everything going wrong. And when you give massive amounts of power to government, then you put them in a position where that makes a lot of sense for them to do that. Because if all the decision making falls on them and everybody's looking at Anthony Fauci and saying, well, whatever Anthony Fauci does, that's what we're going to do, which is essentially what most of the governors in America were saying for a long time, then why would Anthony Fauci say, you know what, let's open things back up again? Why? Why would he do that? He's much better off saying, you know what, let's lock everything down. He's much better off not telling people what he was hearing about masks and everything else, because if it turns out that that's not the case, right, then he's the villain. So it makes so much sense in all of these situations. And I think that's what motivated a lot of governors, too. I think a lot of governors were just saying, you know what, let's keep everything locked down. How else do you explain hardcore right-wing Republicans keeping things locked down, which is what happened in a lot of states? How do you explain that? That wasn't to hurt Donald Trump. That wasn't because they love locking people down. It was because they were just covering their butts. That's all it was.
Yeah, well,
that's what politicians do.
Well, no, there's definitely multiple factors going on, and there's definitely like covering your bases in case this is worse than what you expected. But we covered a lot of stories that made it seem that showed that a lot of these blue state governors were totally doing this to undermine the whole Trump economy and all of that stuff. So I think that there's multiple factors here. Is it 100% one thing or 100% another? Probably not. But I think there was definitely an element of Orange Man bad that was causing a lot of these decisions to be made. But I want to get to other topics. So
I don't. Let's keep on this one.
It's
all right.
We're just going to retitle this one Fauci rant. So the Joe Biden budget, he released a budget proposal for the next X amount of years. Our very own Justin Haskins wrote an article on it that was featured on townhall.com titled How Biden's Bloated Budget Could Cause an Economic Collapse. You start off saying President Joe Biden released his budget for the new fiscal year last week, and while many words could be used to describe the far left policy proposals, perhaps the most important is reckless. The price tag for Biden's budget is a whopping $6 trillion, and it includes absolutely massive increases in domestic spending. So, Justin, in a world where the government stopped worrying about realistic budgets decades ago, what makes this proposed budget stand out to you?
So I think that the most important thing here, the federal government's been spending money recklessly for a very long time. But what makes this budget so bad is that the impact of a lot of that reckless spending, especially inflation, has started to occur. We've started to see inflation. We saw in, I think, let me pull up the number, but in April, the inflation rate, according to the Consumer Price Index, which I think actually hides inflation quite a bit, was 4.2%, which is substantially higher than what we were seeing in previous months. It was a 62% increase compared to March, the previous month, and March had been a massive increase over the previous month. And so when you look at inflation, it's obvious that when the economy started to open back up again, and all of those dollars that had been printed, trillions and trillions of dollars that had been printed during the pandemic and just prior to the pandemic, started making its way back into the economy, you started to see huge amounts of inflation. I mean, there's other factors too, but that was one of the main factors driving inflation. I mean, when you're sending checks in the mail to millions of people who never lost their jobs, and you're just giving them extra money, and they have no place to spend it because the entire economy is locked down, and it's supposedly a stimulus, package, which doesn't make any sense. What is there to stimulate? You've locked everything down. That money is going to be spent at some point, and people have been waiting to spend it. And now that there's something to spend it on, they're spending it, and inflation is increasing. So the reason that this matters, the reason we're talking about all of this, is because the worst thing that you can do when you're starting to see inflation creep up is to spend even more money. And that's what Joe Biden wants to do. Joe Biden has all these massive spending programs. There's elder care. There's a whole bunch of different things. $174 billion for electric vehicles, $100 billion to expand high-speed internet, $200 billion for so-called free universal pre-K, $109 billion for community college. The list goes on and on and on. Trillions of dollars of these things that we don't really need, and yet we're going. I'm not saying that those priorities don't matter at all, and that there aren't ways we can improve those things. But do we really need to be spending trillions of dollars that we don't have, printing it, inventing it, and pumping it into the economy at a time when we already have inflation? Of course not. And then when you look at the other parts of his budget, when you combine that, the spending increases, with the parts of the budget that increase taxes on people, on businesses especially, and wealthy individuals and families, you have you're creating horrible economic conditions. On the one hand, you want to spend lots of money and pump it into the economy, just as inflation is starting to get worse, thereby causing more inflation. On the other hand, you want to kill job creation by dramatically increasing taxes on corporations by raising the rate from 21% to 28%. Okay, one of the largest tax increases on corporations in the history of the country. And then simultaneously, you're putting the Fed in a position, the Federal Reserve in a position where if they actually want to battle inflation, the only thing they can do is raise interest rates in order to help curb that inflation, which would in turn cause all sorts of economic problems, because higher interest rates mean it's more expensive to get a car, it's more expensive to buy a house, the national debt is harder to pay back, on and on and on. Because of all of these problems, when you combine everything together, the budget not only is a horrible, dangerous, reckless budget, it's literally one of the stupidest policies that has been put forward given the context of where we're at as a country right now. The last thing we need to do is to be increasing government spending at a time when we've already been spending a historic amount of money. That just doesn't make any sense when you have large inflation rates and other things. By the way, and just one last thing, the last time inflation spiked like this was September 2008. For those of you who are old enough to remember, which should be just about everybody, what happened in right after September 2008, it was one of the largest financial catastrophes we've ever had in this country. So we are setting ourselves up for failure here. And it's obvious to everybody, apparently, except for Joe Biden and Democrats, because they don't really care about that, about these priorities. But we are headed for extremely dangerous times if this budget actually gets passed.
Yeah, for all those 13-year-olds that are listening, check out your history books.
Yeah, 13-year-olds.
Jim, I mean, we should feel a little bit of relief looking at this budget, right? I mean, $6 trillion, it could have easily been a $12 trillion budget. Is that the silver lining of the story?
Boy, you're really easy to impress, Donnie. I gotta say. No, I mean, obviously I agree with Justin here. It's like this budget is a disaster. In fact, every single economic policy of this administration is a disaster. You realize we're only in month 6 of the Biden administration. We have 3.5 long years to go. And look at how much damage has been done. I mean, again, I don't want to keep talking about Fauci again, but we go back to the lockdowns. Before the lockdowns for COVID-19, and again, Sweden didn't do that, and several other countries didn't do it, and they came out of the other end just fine. We did it on purpose. We destroyed the best economy that this country has seen in decades, and in some measures ever. Lowest unemployment rate for African Americans ever recorded. Lowest unemployment rate for Hispanic Americans ever recorded. Inflation was nil. Was never. In fact, nobody's really cared about inflation for at least 2 decades. It was just never a factor. And prices were low. The economy was humming along. And then COVID hit. We shut everything down. COVID didn't cause the economic crisis. Shutting us all down caused the economic crisis. There's a difference. And people should remember it that way. It was suicide. We committed suicide of our economy. Again, because of that bad orange man. We got to get him out of there because he probably would have been reelected if not for COVID-19 based on the economy alone. But yes, a $6 trillion budget. Look, this podcast, Justin especially, has criticized Donald Trump in his administration for not really caring about spending. He would threaten to veto some kind of bloated spending bill as a compromise between Republicans and Democrats in Congress, and then he'd sign it anyway. But he'd warn next time, I'm not going to do it again. I'm going to veto the next one I see. And he didn't veto any of them. That's fine. But that is, those budgets look so much more responsible compared to what we have right now. And Justin, I think this is intentional. This is, the idea, like inflation. I don't want to be. We've already put away some other conspiracy theories, but it's hard not to think. Let's just put it this way: if you were trying your best to destroy the American economy and our position, our economic position in the world, as strong as it was during Trump and as strong as it could be if we had good policies right now, if you were trying to keep the United States down, what would you do differently than what this administration has done in the last 6 months? They're spending us into oblivion. We're going to have inflation. It's already here. It's already happening. Lumber, for some reason, is 300% more expensive now than it was 1 year ago.
Incentivizing people not to work.
Incentivizing people not to work, $300 a week. That's a pretty good deal. And I get to sit on my ass and not have to, drive my Uber around or go back to the pizza shop or be, or any of my jobs. I don't have to do that anymore. The government's going to pay me. If you were trying to make the American economy as moribund and depressing as possible, you would do everything that this administration has done economically so far. And this budget is just the capstone on it. All this spending, and nobody knows where it goes. $6 trillion. I mean, what is the national debt? It's our poll said it. It's 28, what is it? Probably $29 trillion right now. $29 trillion. 1 year, we're going to spend another $6 trillion according to this budget. That is insanity. And again, to me, it's economic suicide. It's a choice. And all we have to do is as Trump proved, all you have to do is get out of the way and get the government out of the way of the private sector. And this economy is always poised to be the best in the world. But the current administration doesn't want that, apparently, because they haven't implemented a single policy that makes any economic sense.
Yeah, obviously there's going to be numerous critics of this proposal on the conservative and libertarian side of the aisle. But it's especially noteworthy when you have a person on the left criticizing this plan. Justin, you were telling me about some comments that Larry Summers, who was the former Treasury Secretary under Obama, I believe, made about this plan. What did he have to say?
I don't have the quote in front of me, so I'll have to look it up. But essentially, what Larry Summers said was, actually, here it is, right here. I pulled it up. He says, "I think the policy," he's referring to the stimulus and that sort of thing, that Joe Biden wants in this budget. "I think the policy is rather overdoing it. The sense of serenity and complacency being projected by the economic policymakers that this is all something that can easily be managed is misplaced. We're taking very substantial risks on the inflation side." He said this was, I think it was during the same time, but it was in a different part of the thing. "We're taking very substantial risks on the inflation side." So, I mean, I think the fact that you have an Obama person, a person who knows Joe Biden, who's worked alongside Joe Biden, actively coming out and saying, I don't know if it's a good idea, guys, that we're spending trillions and trillions of dollars that we don't have while we're in the midst of seeing massive inflation, I think is everything you need to know, because the left circles the wagons better than any group of people in the entire universe in America.
No doubt.
They never, ever, ever criticize each other. Ever.
Yeah, whereas conservatives are the best at circular firing squads.
Exactly. And so for Summers to come out and do this, it really is quite telling. And I think that the other thing that people need to keep in mind when they're thinking about this budget is that I don't think I've ever seen this before. Normally, when you see budgets, even irresponsible budgets, like I considered the Trump budgets to be irresponsible budgets, but even those budgets, when you look at them, and Obama did this too, they would show you these 10-year projections, right? This is how all these budgets they have 10-year projections. And what they always show is they'll show, well, we got to increase spending the first few years, but then the economic growth that we're going to have from all of our policies, whether it's like tax cuts or in the case of Obama, big stimulus packages, whatever, the debt's going to go down after that. You don't have anything to worry about. You're going to see steep national deficits they're going to decline, and we're going to have this great economy, but you got to give us like 5 years for this to happen, right?
Oh, 5 years. That sounds like a 5-year plan.
That's how it always works, right?
Right.
But the Joe Biden budget, it doesn't do that at all. In fact, when you look at it, It shows deficits staying essentially above $1 trillion the whole time, all 10 years. The first deficit is $1.8 trillion. Then the deficit goes down a little bit, but it stays above $1 trillion. And then at the end, it starts going back up again. And so I've never seen this before, where someone openly comes out and says, you know what, my 10-year plan is for us to have a horrible deficit. That's the plan. That's Joe Biden's plan. In fact, the GDP, the debt to GDP ratio at the end of this thing is like 117% for the economy. So this is the thing. The plan is for us to have more debt than our economy is worth. Think about that. That's the plan.
Right.
That makes no sense. And it's 10 years from now. It would be so easy for Joe Biden he couldn't even muster up the strength to lie about it.
Well, and that's the rosy projections, right? He's obviously not factoring in some type of other economic setback or some type of other world event or a second wave of COVID or some Ebola strain. I don't know. He's not factoring any of those things into it.
Not only that, but he's factoring in all of this magical economic growth that's going to come from these stupid, universal pre-K. Think about all the pre-K teachers we're going to have and how great that's going to be for the economy. And it's just like those kinds of projections are built into this, right? And so this is the wildly delusional positive version. Is the one with like an average of $1.3 trillion deficits every year for 10 years. That's the plan.
Right.
When your plan is 117% of GDP, debt to GDP rate, when that's the plan, you know that you're in really bad shape. Really bad shape. And that's where we're at, folks. We're in a horrible position. Not even Barack Obama would do something like this. Not even him. Not even close. And I think it's telling how I think it's telling where we're at as a country, not just in the sense of how bad we are economically in many ways, but also that the American people are just willing to accept this as, yeah, okay, I guess. Like there's no one rising up in the streets over this. It's just, well, I guess this is our new normal. And another thing, the economic growth projections for this are also like, I think it's less than 3% across the board throughout this whole thing. So he's not even projecting great economic growth. This is one of the worst budget proposals I've ever seen, even from like a political propaganda standpoint. This is not good. So it really is shocking. And if the American people actually cared about this stuff, and a lot of them, I guess, just don't, this would be headline news everywhere. Right. But it's not, because most people don't care and the media is going to cover it up anyway. But we are headed for really bad shape, guys. We really are.
A couple more quotes.
Yeah.
A couple
Amen,
more.
Howard.
A couple more quotes from Larry Summer. He said, "I'm concerned that we're injecting more demand in the economy than the potential supply of the economy is likely to work out to be, and that will generate overheating. The Fed has almost no success gently bringing down inflation once an economy has started to overheat." So those are more of Larry Summers' concerns about the potential for inflation.
See, in today's world, Larry Summers is basically like a right-wing Milton Friedman type now.
A Stephanie Kelton would say that.
Yeah,
I am not even joking. She called Obama basically a fiscal conservative in her book. Yeah. I kid you not. The face of modern monetary theory, Stephanie Kelton. Also in the show notes, everything we talk about is in the show notes. If you want to read at length all the things we're talking about, I have an article from the Cato Institute that is titled President Biden's Proposed Budget. In it, it says some of the things that Justin was mentioning. It says the Biden budget shows federal debt held by the public rising from 100% of GDP in 2020 to 117% by 2031. We are not at war, and yet the level of debt is higher than the 31% reached during the Civil War, 33% reached in World War I, and 106% reached in World War II. I mean, we are at war, right? I mean, technically, but whatever. And to show you that our monetary system is in the best of hands, our current Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, had this to say about the budget. Quote, "I believe it is fiscally responsible program."
Sounds like a great Treasury Secretary, doesn't it?
Absolutely. One of our viewers asks, and if interest rates go up, Justin, you've mentioned this to me in the course of conversations. If interest rates go up, then the trying to manage the actual interest payments on the debt skyrocket. And
Right.
that just compounds these problems.
When interest rates go up, it's harder for the government to pay back the debt it owes because it has to pay higher interest rates in order to finance that debt.
Yeah.
And so what it does is it creates this death spiral for the government where the debt just eats up more and more and more and more of the budget. The only way to get out of that is to either cut spending dramatically so that you're running a budget surplus, which essentially will never happen as long as the dollar exists the way it is right now. It will never happen. The other option is you try to hold the debt and the spending relatively steady, and then you grow your way out of it over a long period of time. That's the plan that, Donald Trump was pushing. We'll just grow our way out of it. The problem with that is, Donald Trump isn't president forever. Joe Biden comes in and you have coronavirus and you have all these things. And now all of a sudden it's spiraling out of control again, right? So those plans often don't work either. So the interest rates impact the budget in that way because it makes it harder to spend, harder to pay back the debt. But it also impacts the entire economy because when the interest rates go up, what people need to understand is we've had almost 0% interest rates for years and years and years, extremely historically low interest rates.
2009, essentially.
Right. And so all of the prices that you see in the economy today have that built into it. So when you look at housing, when you look at cars, when you look at all this stuff, it's all based on this idea that it's super easy to take on debt because the interest rates are so low. When the interest rates go up, and a lot of younger people, people my generation, for instance, they don't remember a time with high interest rates because ever since we've been adults, the interest rates have been dirt cheap, right? They've been low. So it's easy to take on debt, all right? Debt is cheap. But when interest rates go up, you have to start building that. It affects the housing market big time. It can cause a crash for the housing market. It can affect car companies, any big ticket items, financial institutions, and it has a cascading effect because you have all of these other things that are built on top of it. The stock market, investments, companies that are insurance companies that back up other companies that have taken on all of these investments, which now go bad. There's all, we saw what happened in 2008 and 2009, when the house of cards kind of came crashing down because of a lot of these same kinds of issues. Now we have those same kinds of problems, except it's on steroids. It's much, much worse than it was back then. There's a big, gigantic house of cards, and if the interest rates go up, it's going to crash. If they don't raise the interest rates, the dollar is going to continue to be devalued, and then you run the risk of the dollar being replaced by another currency in terms of the world reserve currency status. The world uses the dollar for everything. International transactions, most international transactions, they rely on the dollar. Well, what if they replace the dollar with something else? That will cause another financial catastrophe here in the United States. So when you add all these things up, the point that I'm making at is the only way long term to stabilize the U.S. economy and prevent a gigantic financial catastrophe is to keep spending steady, grow our way out of it with pro-growth economic policies, be responsible with spending going forward, and by doing that, you will instill a sense of faith and trust in the dollar so that the dollar does not get replaced as the world reserve currency, and you will eventually grow your way into a situation where you can manage the debt and hopefully eventually get to balanced budgets at some point in the future. But that is never going to happen with the kinds of policies that we see with Joe Biden, and frankly, even with Donald Trump. We weren't on track for that to happen, but it's definitely not going to happen now. And we're reaching the point, we've probably already reached the point of no return. I know Donnie feels that way. I mean, we've reached the point of no return here in a lot of ways. I think we're headed for an economic catastrophe at some point. I don't know if it's this year or next year or 5 years from now or whatever, but the house of cards is already been built, and we're already relying on that house of cards, and it will eventually collapse. And when it does, we're in very big trouble.
Jim, I do want to. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Bill.
Jim, I want to move on to our last topic, but I'll give you any last words that you want to say on this.
Well, Justin, you said that not even Obama would have dreamed of implementing fiscal policies like this during his administration. And that made me think that people call this the third Obama term. And I think they learned, because Donald Trump was elected president, they realized there was a lot of unfinished business that they wanted to do. In fact, they just wanted to go full on socialist. And so they're in a big hurry. Again, you just said, Justin, that I think it's already too late, that everything's already ruined, that we're already down the road too far. It's been 6 months. It's been 6 months with this president, and we're already too far down the road of, past the point of no return. It reminds me, I don't want to overstate things, but, that's kind of my thing. So I'll do it. The thing that Marxists and socialists and communists always say, despite the entire century of communism and Marxism and socialism failing as an economic policy, and not to mention how murderous it always ends up becoming, is that, we didn't try it the right way. We didn't do it right. The people running our government today are looking at Venezuela, looking at and thinking, you know what? They had a good idea, but they just didn't do it right. We'll do it right here in the United States. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. Don't worry about it. We can just basically command and control the economy, try to keep some semblance of capitalism going, but really dominate the economy through government spending, endless government spending, and things will work out great. It is not going to work out great. It's already not working out great for a lot of Americans right now, and it's going to get, frankly and sadly, worse, as you said, Justin.
I think it's a really important point. I think what clearly happened was, I believe that after because Barack Obama was, in their minds, really popular and was going to lead to a perfect transition to Hillary Clinton, and that they believed that they could slowly do this over a 16-year period, essentially, starting with Obama, running through the next person. They really believed that this was going to happen. And then when Donald Trump, became the hand grenade that blew up the big plan that they had for the world, right, for America,
in glorious fashion,
right? What they realized was, okay, if we get a second chance, we're not going to screw this up. We're not going to wait around. We're not going to try to ease America into it. We're going to go full bore. I think you're 100% right. And the coronavirus was the perfect justification for that.
The battering ram to take down the door.
As Prince Charles said, is the golden opportunity. It's the golden opportunity to do everything that they've always wanted to do, but didn't have the justification to do it. Now they have the justification. They've normalized a lot of these policies, which would never have been tolerated under any other circumstances. And they've taken that opportunity and they're running with it. And like 90% of Joe Biden's administration is Obama people. So they've been through all this before. They know what's going on. I mean, it's not 90%, but it's a lot of them. They know what's going on. They've been through this before. They're not going to blow this opportunity. Joe Biden is not making these decisions. Joe Biden doesn't even decide what he's going to eat for lunch. He just eats whatever they put in front of him. Okay? This is all about the people around him, the true believers around him who want to put into place the dream that Barack Obama had to fundamentally transform America, that he never got to complete, that Hillary Clinton never got to complete because of Donald Trump. That's what this is all about. And frankly, it's working. And if we don't stand up to it and expose it and stop it, it is going to happen. It's already in the process of happening, and it is truly terrifying. But I mean, that's the reality of the situation, and we all have to face it and plan for the future accordingly.
So before we move on to the last topic of discussion, I just want to point out to all of the audio listeners of this podcast that are listening to this on the Friday when it comes out, you can listen to the podcast, watch the podcast one day early on Thursday. If you follow us on YouTube, the Heartland Institute, just look it up. You'll find us. And you can watch us live. You can put in your comments and questions, and we might address them live on the show. So something to take into account there. But I do want to talk about one last topic for this week. And this is one that was interesting to Justin and I, who've been kind of following the cryptocurrency, generally speaking, for a long time, and specifically for a shorter amount of time. El Salvador, just last week, proposed that they were going to make Bitcoin legal tender in their country. And I just thought it was going to be one of these things like that was where the story ended and it didn't go any further. But just a couple of days ago, they actually passed that resolution into law. And Bitcoin is going to become the first country to adopt Bitcoin as its legal tender. It says lawmakers in the Central American countries, Congress voted by a supermajority in favor of the Bitcoin law, receiving 62 out of 84 of the legislators' votes. It says the purpose of the law is to regulate Bitcoin as an unrestricted legal tender by liberating power unlimited in any transaction and to any title that public or private, natural or legal persons require carrying out, the law reads. So I think this is kind of crazy. I don't know what effect this will have. Some of these articles are trying to suggest that this caused the Bitcoin price to bump up like 10%. I'm not exactly sure. There's a million things that are affecting those prices on any given day. But I just find it, just the novelty of the story, really interesting. But before, Justin and I kind of jump into some of the details about this, I just want Jim's reaction. What do you think? What do you think about this? I heard Andy laugh in the background. What do you think when you hear this? When you hear this story?
Well, as much as I like the idea of alternative currencies to something off the grid, as Bitcoin was promised to be, the idea of the world following El Salvador's fiscal policies, using Bitcoin as the coin of the realm, is kind of, I think, irrelevant. I mean, I think it's a nice development. But, it's kind of like everybody should adopt El Salvador's national animal as their pet. I mean, what relevance does it have in the rest of the world? Maybe you guys can enlighten me.
Hey, the sand iguana is going to become
the hot new pet this year.
Well, I mean, in your opinion, Jim, I assume that maybe a lot of our audience dismisses Bitcoin. If I'm gonna invest my money in some type of alternative currency, it's gonna be gold. So I assume that there is a decent chunk of people that kind of dismiss this. Do you think of it as like a legitimate currency, or do you think of it as like a novelty thing?
I'm still kind of on the fence. I don't think actually we know yet, to be honest. There are some. I saw there was a couple professional athletes, members of the NFL. I think one of the rookies, he wanted half of his signing bonus in Bitcoin. So, and a few others had followed suit. So that's really interesting. And now you see, not now, but for a while now, Bitcoin is basically traded as a stock. It goes up and down. You buy shares of Bitcoin or shares of another cryptocurrency. I don't think that's what the inventors of cryptocurrency had in mind. That seems a little too mainstream to me. And it seems like a pretty risky investment because, there's already rumblings about cryptocurrencies being regulated, if not by the United States or country by country, but by the world. We have the G7. The G7 summit. They're going to be talking about a global corporate tax. So the idea of trying to hide your wealth or participate in an economy kind of like underground, which is what Bitcoin again was sold as, which was what it kind of was, that people were, getting around the system. I think the system has already pretty much, in my mind, consumed cryptocurrency, and now it is part of the entire, swampy system of finance around the globe.
Yeah, we don't have like a ton of time left. I had this video that was put together by Reason that kind of shows what the potential liberating effects of this currency is. So if you're interested, you could check it out. The video will be linked in the show notes of this, but it talks about how it's a peer-to-peer process. It requires no banking, no government intermediary. So governments and banks can't debank you if you're deemed to be a deplorable or something like that. So it says that the liberating effect of this is potentially massive, a free, uncoerced, decentralized form of transactions that is much harder to be cracked down by governments than just your standard typical, U.S. currency or something. In terms of the other things that actually makes like a currency legitimate, there's I was reading an article that was talking about the 6 key attributes that makes a currency legitimate. One is scarcity, one's divisibility, utility, transportability, durability, and counterfeitability. And Bitcoin passes with all of these in spades. Some critics of it talk about how this is just like another form of fiat, but there is some intrinsic value to some of these currencies. Other ones, not so much. The Doge coins that are being promoted by the Elon Musks of the world are not worth anything. That is just like a meme that has value to it. But a bunch of these other ones, Bitcoin included, but there's other ones as well, they're built on top of a blockchain. I don't want to get too into the weeds here, but the blockchain is a decentralized digital database, essentially. It could store data on a number of things in a fast, secure, and decentralized way. This includes transaction data, supply chain data, medical records even, property records, smart contracts, even voting could theoretically could utilize blockchain technology. And the more that it's used, the more value that the currency that's built on top of it has. hence why Bitcoin went from pennies to tens of thousands of dollars. But Justin, when you see El Salvador passing this, and it's actually going to be using this as a form of currency that's going to be interchangeable with the US dollar, which it also uses down there, what's your reaction?
Well, I mean, on the one hand, I think that where Bitcoin is at right now, it is, the price of it, the value of it is so unstable that to build an economy, so that it's relying on it, although it's not relying totally on it. So I think it's a little bit different. It's a little bit risky, obviously, in some ways, but I think that the long-term viability of cryptocurrency is extremely high. And the reason why is not because it allows for there to be some sort of underground, market where you can just get out of the system or whatever. I don't know that it's necessarily about that. It may have been partially about that before, for sure. But at this point, there's tons of institutions that have already bought into this. Tons of the wealthiest institutions, banks are studying it now. You've got central banks. Now you have governments who are either looking at it, or now you have one who actually adopted it as a currency. It has lots of institutional buy-in at this point. And I think that the reason for that is not because they want a secret way to store their money or a secret way of buying things. It's because I think there are increasingly greater number of people who realize that the existing system that we have right now, the existing financial system, is it's a total circus. It makes no sense at all. It's completely illogical what we have right now. It is just one central bank after another printing, and when I say printing, they don't even print the actual money. It's them on a electronic spreadsheet moving money around. We don't even know who the people are that are running the Fed and making decisions and pulling the levers of power. The Federal Reserve is talking about creating bank accounts that they will have directly with consumers, so that now you bank directly with the Fed. So if the Fed wanted, they could just wake up one morning and then just push a couple keystrokes, and all of a sudden everybody has $1,000 in their bank account that they didn't have before. The whole idea of a fiat currency system is built on trust. It's built on trust of the people who back it. Mm-hmm. And what's happened is that trust has been totally and completely eroded. And the reason why people trust Bitcoin and Ethereum and other things more than they trust that is because humans are not really, they're decentralized. They're not really in control of it. And because there's no one who's really totally in control of these things, it's all built on blockchain and smart contracts, meaning it's automated. Everything's automated. And so you don't have some bank or corporation saying, you know what, we're not going to make loans to oil companies because oil companies are destroying the planet. You don't have that under smart contracts because it can't distinguish between who these people are. It's just basing it on pure finances. That's it. It's taking the human element out of a lot of decision making, and because of that, it's I think becoming increasingly more trustworthy. The other part of it is Bitcoin is designed to have a fixed amount. You can't add more of it over time. So eventually you're going to have a certain amount of Bitcoin and there's never going to be more of it. And unlike the dollar, which they just print trillions and trillions of more of it all the time, unlike every fiat currency system. And so that's another reason why Bitcoin, and not all cryptos are that way, but that's another reason why Bitcoin is trusted. So I think there are legitimate reasons to believe that eventually this could be an alternative to the existing financial system, especially the smart contract stuff. When you actually start looking at smart contract, we don't have time to talk about it now, I know, but when you actually start looking at smart contracts, you look at decentralized finance and other things that are built on these blockchains, all of which have cryptocurrencies tied to them. You realize that the existing banking system that we have right now, you realize that much of the existing financial institutions could all be replaced by a system that is not going to be controlled by oligarchs and by left-wing ideologues. It can be decentralized and put into a situation where you don't have that kind of thing going on. So I do see the appeal to it, and I do think in the long run it could actually work. Government might kill it. They might destroy it before we ever get to that point. But to be totally honest,
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to happen because a lot of these oligarchs are trying to make money on it too. So,
way to go. What a professional you are, Justin. Teeing him up for
I'm
that,
real good.
giving him a second opportunity. But yeah, no, there's a lot of interesting things at play here. So like businesses have to accept it because it's like a legal tender there. But the country, as far as I'm aware, is going to have like a I don't know, for lack of a better term, like a sovereign wealth fund that will basically be able to redeem any Bitcoin that a company wants to trade in for like the dollar just at any moment in time. So theoretically, El Salvador, after a period of time, is going to have like a pretty substantial amount of Bitcoin sitting in a sovereign fund.
I didn't know that.
And if it like multiplied, if it times is 10, like watch El Salvador just become like one of the richest. It's going to be like the Wakanda of Central America after like 10 years. So it'll be interesting to see.
That's pretty crazy. I did not know that.
Yeah.
I did not know that. Yeah, that actually is actually really interesting. Maybe the whole point of this, and I'm not trying to, I don't know what's in the minds of these El Salvadorian leaders, but it's actually a pretty brilliant scheme to get a bunch of Bitcoin in your control.
Right.
Because if you're running one of these governments and people are exchanging they're like, Bitcoin, I don't trust Bitcoin. And then you take that Bitcoin and you hold it.
Yeah.
And that Bitcoin is worth $1 million each next, 10 years from now or 20 years from now or something. Yeah, El Salvador could be filthy rich over this.
It would be amazing.
Would be amazing if that
It would be
happened.
amazing to see. This whole topic is something that I'm I'm interested in talking about. I think we're going to talk about this stuff more. Not necessarily El Salvador, but we have seen a number of countries start floating the idea of having a central bank backed digital currency. We know China's actively working on this. The U.S. has given conflicting signals on their work on a digital central bank digital currency. And the IMF has floated the idea of making a digital coin out of their special drawing rights SDR system. So we're definitely going to see some aspect of this in the future. I don't exactly know how it'll look. I don't know what protections are going to be guaranteed. I don't know what the control of the respective governments over this digital currency will be, but you can count on the fact that we will talk about it in the future. But that is going to do it. We're already a couple of minutes over time, so we are going to call it a day on episode 298 of the In the Tank podcast. If you like our show, please join us every Thursday if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, or Friday if you're just an audio listener. If you would like, you can subscribe to us, write a review. That would be greatly appreciated. You can send us your comments, questions, suggestions for the show by emailing us at inthethinkpodcast@gmail.com. Justin, where can the fine people find you?
You can find me at Justin T. Haskins on Facebook and Socialist Twitter.
That's right. And Jim, just, I don't know what happened to their internet, but he is gone. But I'm sure you could find him on Twitter at JLakely or Heartland Inst, or just go and find all of our content at heartland.org.
It was a cyber attack from Anthony Fauci.
He's on to us. Oh my gosh. All right. Thank you all for tuning in. We will talk to you next week.